Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back once again to Today in African History with Baba Shaka. I'm Baba Shaka, and today is July 13th, 2021. And some of you may have noticed that we've sort of been off the air, so to speak, for a couple of days. Had some things to take care of, but we are back. And today, let's take a look at the Draft Riots, which took place in New York City in 1883. The New York Draft Riots occurred in July 1883 when the anger of working class New Yorkers over a new federal draft law during the Civil War sparked 5 days of some of the bloodiest, most destructive rioting in U.S. history. Hundreds of people were killed, many more seriously injured, and Africans in America were often the target of the rioters' violence. As the business capital of the nation, New York City had not welcomed the onset of the Civil War, as it meant losing the South as a trading partner. See, cotton was an extremely valuable product for New York's merchants. Before the Civil War, cotton represented 40% of all the goods shipped out of the city's ports. And long after the slave trade was made illegal in 1808, the city's illicit slave market thrived. Now, when the war broke out in 1861, there was even talk of New York seceding from the Union itself. Yes, it did. Go check it out. Some people were talking about New York seceding from the nation because it was so entwined were the city's business interests with the Confederate States. But as the war progressed, New York's anti-war politicians and newspapers kept warning its working-class white citizens, many of them Irish or German immigrants, that emancipation would mean their replacement in the labor force by thousands of freed enslaved people from the South. In September of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation, which would take effect early the following year, and that confirmed the workers' worst fears. At the time, Lincoln's decision for emancipation sparked protests among workers in the city, as well as soldiers and officers in New York's regiment who had signed up to preserve the Union, but not to abolish slavery. See, they don't mind preserving the Union because it was good business, but they didn't sign up to abolish slavery. Now, facing a dire shortage of manpower in early 1863, Lincoln's government passed a strict new conscription law, which made all male citizens between the age of 20 and 35 and all unmarried men between 35 and 45 subject to military duty. Though all eligible men were entered into a lottery, they could actually buy their way out of harm's way by hiring a substitute or paying $300 to the government. Now, $300 in 1863 is roughly about $5,800 today. It's a lot of money. And at the time, that sum was the yearly salary for most average American workers, making it impossible to avoid the draft for all but the wealthiest of men. And that has been the case throughout the history of the draft in these here yet to be United States. Now, compounding the issue, Africans in America were exempt from the draft as they were not considered citizens. I mean, go look up the Dred Scott case. We were not considered citizens, so we were exempt from the draft. Riots over the draft occurred in other cities, including Detroit and Boston, but nowhere as badly as in New York. Anti-war newspapers published attacks on the new draft law, fueling the mounting anger of white workers leading up to the city's first draft lottery on July 11, 1863. Now, for the first 24 hours after the lottery, the city remained suspiciously quiet, but rioting began early on the morning of Monday, July 13th. This date, July 13th, in 1863. Right? Now, thousands of white workers, mainly Irish and Irish Americans, started by attacking military and government buildings and became violent only towards people who tried to stop them, including the insufficient number of policemen and soldiers that the city leaders initially sent out to oppose them. But by that afternoon, however, they had moved on to target black people, homes, and businesses. In one notorious example, a mob of several thousand people, some armed with clubs and bats, stormed the Colored Orphan Asylum on Fifth Avenue near 42nd Street. That was a 4-story building housing more than 200 children stormed by these people. They took everything. They took bedding, they took food, they took clothing and other goods and set fire to the orphanage. But thankfully, they stopped short of assaulting the children, who were then forced to go to one of the city's almshouses. In addition to African people themselves, rioters turned their rage against white abolitionists and white women who were married to African men. White dock workers long opposed the African men working on the docks alongside them, and a demonstration against employers hiring black workers on the docks had turned violent earlier in 1863. So they now took this opportunity to destroy many of the businesses near the docks that catered to African workers and attack their owners as part of their efforts to erase the black working class from the city. White savages. By far, the worst violence was reserved for African men, a number of whom were lynched or beaten to death with shocking brutality. Now, let me tell you, the brutality wasn't shocking. We've seen it over and over again, right? White savagery. In all, the published death toll of the New York City draft riots was 119 people, though estimates of the actual number of people killed reached as high as 1,200. New York leaders struggled with the task of containing the draft riots. Governor Horatio Seymour was a quote-unquote peace Democrat who openly opposed the draft law and appeared sympathetic to the riots. Now that's an oxymoron if I ever heard one. A man of peace sympathetic to violent rioters, right? Now, New York City's Republican mayor, George Updike, wired the War Department to send federal troops, but hesitated on declaring martial law in response to the rioting. On July 15, the third day of the protest, rioting spread to Brooklyn and Staten Island. The following day, the first of more than 4,000 federal troops arrived from New York regiments who had been fighting in the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, after clashing with rioters in what is now known was not the Murray neighborhood, the troops were finally able to restore order, and by midnight of July 16th, the New York City draft riots had come to an end, thankfully. In addition to the death toll, the riots had caused millions of dollars in property damage and made some 3,000 of the city's African residents homeless. The New York draft riots remain the deadliest riots in U.S. history, even worse than the 1992 Los Angeles riots and the 1967 Detroit riots, even though I personally would classify what took place in LA in 1992 and in Detroit in 1967 as uprising rather than riots. Now, when the Colored Orphan Asylum attempted to rebuild on the same site after the riots, neighboring property owners protested, and the orphanage would eventually be relocated to the sparsely settled area north of the city that would later become Harlem. Stunned by the riots, the abolitionist movement in New York City revived itself slowly, and in March 1864, less than a year after the draft riots, New York City saw its first all-black volunteer regiment in the Union Army march with pomp and circumstance through the streets before boarding the ship in the Hudson River. But despite this meaningful victory, the draft riots would have a devastating impact on the city's African community. While the 1860 census recorded 12,414 black New Yorkers, by 1865, the city's black population had declined to 9,945, the lowest number since 1820. So don't think that all the racist, pro-slavery, sons of biscuit eaters were down in Dixie. Oh no, that sentiment was certainly existed in many northern locales, including New York City. Now, I would like to thank our new sponsor, G.A.J.Fashion, LLC, who supplied this beautiful shirt, beautiful dashiki. Yes, Miss Julie has got the barber looking most splendiferous. Yeah, I'm sure you agree. Now, I leave the contact info down in the comment section. Make sure you give Miss Julie a call, and if you can, stop by to experience all of her magnificent creations. And trust me, she has, I could just describe her creations as magnificent. I'm sure you agree when you see it. Now, thank you to all of our subscribers who keep us going. To those of you who have not yet subscribed, we encourage you to hit that subscribe button just below and lend us your much needed support. Please like and leave a comment down in the comment section below. But most importantly, please share, especially with the young amongst us, because as you and I both know, this material is not taught in our schools. So, until tomorrow, inshallah, this is Baba Shaka with Today in African History. Masala.